Hi, this is Jerry DiPiano from Fem Pharma, and you are listening to or watching the Love Mia Vita podcast. My guest today is an amazing woman who is a serial entrepreneur, a women's healthcare advocate, and an expert in the menopause space, Denise Pines. Denise, thank you so much for joining me on the Love Mia Vita podcast. I'm so happy to have you as my guest. And we could just talk for hours, but today we're not going to talk for hours because we know that our listeners need to get on with their lives. But you have such an amazing story to share. But first, tell us a little bit more about your background, because you have this amazing background. It was multiple paragraphs long. I don't even think I could read all of it.
Yeah, sure. First, thank you for having me on. And you're right. The last time you and I talked, and even before this, we started this podcast, you and I just have this thing where we can just keep going and going and going at it. So my journey is, it's interesting. I have been in the entertainment world for about 30 years now, doing television shows, radio programs, and documentaries. I now still continue to do documentaries, but not any of the other shows. And so that was the world kind of that I had been orbiting in when I get a hot flash. And I couldn't believe it. And I was like, why am I having hot flashes? Right. And because I'm very active, I run, I do triathlons, I do a half marathon every year, and I eat pretty decently. And so I don't know, I just thought those were the sort of things that kept you away from having hot flashes. And I found that is not true. And that led me on this journey of working with my doctor, and we co-created Tea Botanics, where we do teas for menopause. That led me talking to so many women, realizing that there were so many who were like me, caught off guard, confused by even the menopausal terminology, wasn't able to get the kind of information they were looking for when you go to your doctor. And so decided that I would create something called WisePause Wellness, where I would, in fact, bring these experts, these midlife experts who did know how to answer women's questions, in a platform where women could physically attend and, be able to hear these experts ranging from brain fog to sleeplessness to vaginal health issues to sexual health issues and everything in between that, even physically how our body changes and how we can even dress for the body we actually have now, right? And not look like we've just put a tent over our body. And so in that journey, it led me to realizing there wasn't a lot of what I call fem tech aging solutions. And so I coined this word called fem aging and sort of launched a whole series of research for investors, innovators, and also healthcare clinicians to be able to create a roadmap for what it was women, in fact, did want. And so that has sort of been this journey that, took me away from entertainment and then into creating all of those opportunities. And then I sit on medical regulation boards. So I'm the immediate past president of the Medical Board of California. I currently sit on the Osteopathic Medical Board of California and the Federation of All State Medical Boards.
That is quite a background, and we do want to entertain as we educate. So we don't, yes, they're not mutually exclusive. So I see a natural way in which you can use all of your background doing documentaries and providing entertainment resources as a way to destigmatize, break the taboos of menopause, because let's face it, it's just a transition, and it's a transition that can be quite liberating.
Yes.
But we have in the past made age a stigma. So we don't want to get old, and we're not getting older. We are actually getting better through the transition, but we still have to manage symptoms.
Yes.
So I know that you launched the company Tea Botanics, and you have, among other things, a menopause tea, and you've introduced a couple of new products. So tell us a little bit more about the company that you founded and launched with one of your colleagues.
Yeah, sure. So my partner is my doctor. And he's really big on science and how the body works. I mean, he's like a master of really understanding that. And he had shared with me some properties of this tea that came out of Taiwan, some years prior to me actually getting the first hot flash. And so when I got the hot flash, he told me, hey, remember that tea? I gave you some of it, take it. So fast forward, I take it. I was actually having severe hot flashes, meaning I was having one every single hour and through the night. I take this tea, and in 5 days, it reduces down to about half. And then by the 10th, 11th day, I'm having maybe one hot flash a day. And I'll call him up and go, what is this? So he talks to me about how GABA in our brain that naturally materializes decreases as we get older, decreases in men as well. And sort of he's figured a correlation between that decrease along with our estrogen decrease flares up our hypothalamus and ignites the hot flash response. And so if we elevate that GABA along with the fact that we put some sort of estrogen mimicker herbs into the tea, that we can elevate it up and stop the sort of flashing happening. And so that's really what's happened with the tea. So we have hot flash tea, that's what it's called. We have night sweat tea to support people who have only the night sweats, brain fog, which I almost drink every day, and brain fog tea, and then happiness tea for women who find themselves having anxiety during this time frame, or a sadness like depression, even though everything can be hunky-dory, but for some reason they're just not feeling happy, right? So those are the sort of brands that we have, and everything is organic. It's all like 100% organic.
So these teas are made without hormones, which I know for some women that's their thing, and I don't condemn that because we all want to have options. But these teas are made without hormones. The ingredients are naturally occurring, but there is some science behind this. And I know in the scientific literature, particularly work that was done outside the United States, in Asia, there's a vast amount of information about how these herbs can actually improve mood or sleep. And you talked about GABA and our thermostat, which is in the hypothalamus, and we know that we can turn that switch on and off. Supplementation.
Yes.
So what else is in? You mentioned some other ingredients that are in the tea that are these estrogen mimickers, or what are
estrogen mimickers? So black cohosh and wild yam, and we use the most potent part of that, which is the root. A lot of times when you see black cohosh or wild yam and things, people are using the end part. So they're using the leaves, which is weaker. And that doesn't mean that anytime you see a leaf being used inside of a supplement that it's weak. It just happens to be these two particular herbs. They're weaker as you're using the leaf part, and we use the root part. And to your point about how really Asia really understands, I mean, we know they're the masters of, sort of herbs. I mean, there are older societies than them, but we know that they have been able to chronicle there for thousands of years the use of these herbs. So much so that our black cohosh has been classified as medicine in Taiwan, which is where we used to manufacture. So we had to move manufacturing to the US in order to use that herb. So they know how powerful herbs really are. They're medicine.
Yes. And we, if anyone listening to this or viewing this has ever visited an acupuncturist or an herbalist,
yes,
we do understand that there is value there. And there is a great initiative that's been underway now for more than a decade in integrative medicine, where we combine the benefits of Western and Eastern medicine. So we don't want to poo-poo this concept, because it actually is, there is some science behind it. We have a curiosity about a woman's ability to use this these products,
Mhm.
if they are on, let's say a woman is using hormone replacement therapy, it's not
Mhm.
mutually exclusive. She could still do the menopause tea, correct?
Yes, she could still do the menopause tea. And especially if she, say, been using hormone replacement therapy and she's sort of ready to wean off, the tea probably could help complement the weaning off. So it's not a drastic change for her body. I find women who do decide, like after 5 years, that they kind of want to come off. And then they find some of those symptoms come back, not full throttle, like what made them actually go on it, but they do feel some, like, oh, I'm still having a couple hot flashes or whatnot. So this could be a good complement to you weaning off or just supporting you while you're on, because hormone replacement therapy is not putting GABA back into your brain.
It's not. It absolutely is not. And as someone who actually worked in one of the big pharmaceutical companies where we hung our shingle out because we had this fabulous HRT product,
Yeah.
it's not the panacea, and it's not for every woman. So we like to find natural ways that
Yes.
are more preventative, but also work well. And
Yes.
we know that these types of herbal products do work
Yes.
well. We
Yes.
have some in our own stable.
Exactly.
I guess the other target audience of women are those women who either can't or don't want to use hormone replacement therapy. So someone that has an increased risk of cardiovascular disease or certain
Mhm.
types of malignancies where there is concern.
Mhm.
So this is an opportunity for them to still receive that type of relief without
Yes.
the use of hormones.
Yes, definitely. Even women who have been on chemotherapy and have had, breast cancer or ovarian cancer, they're told to stay completely away from estrogen. And so this would be a good complement of them. They still need estrogen. We all need estrogen, as you know. We have estrogen receptors on every single cell in our entire body, from the brain to the end of our toes. I think one of the other things, Jerry, that we don't do as an entire society, and definitely in the educational part of our society, is really teach about our body. Only people who go into healthcare know how the body works. Why is that? We should all know fundamentally how our body works, right? We should know where our kidneys are, where our adrenal glands are, right? Where our heart actually is. We should know these general things so that we feel a bit more empowered when we actually go to our healthcare clinician and have a conversation. But because we don't, we feel so like, I don't know what to do, or you completely give over 100% of your control to your physician. That should be a partnership, right? That should be conversational. That should be, the doctor, of course, is the wise one, but you have the ability to go and do your own research and then make your choice, right?
Absolutely.
And we don't see it like that.
Well, unfortunately, when we think about where we received this education, it was probably, at least with women, we received a little bit of education when we were either in elementary or the early part of our middle school,
Yeah.
and we learned about menstruation.
Yes.
And then we probably had a teacher that was not that qualified to have that discussion with us.
Yeah.
Perhaps if we had an enlightened parent, mom,
Yeah.
we learned a little bit more from our enlightened mother, but we really didn't have the anatomy and physiology conversation that we all need to be having.
Yes.
Then fast forward to motherhood,
Yeah.
another issue where, depending upon where you grew up and what your resources were, perhaps you didn't know a lot about pregnancy, about conception and fertility or contraception. So you were lacking in that information. And oh my gosh, menopause. Who ever talked about menopause?
Nobody.
A lot of this does start with medical education, and this is not an indictment of any HCP, but these wonderful healthcare practitioners will tell you that in medical school,
Yeah.
textbooks were full of information, and it was largely about the default male.
Yeah.
So really didn't get a lot of great information
Yes.
about the woman's body and how
Yes.
different and physiology and anatomy, of course, were obvious, but how does that transition take place?
And it's
Well,
still very much that way.
yes,
When you look at, I sit on the admissions committee for a medical school. When you look at curriculum today in 2023, it is not very different from what it was 10 years ago, meaning that women make up a little bit more than half of the society, unless we just talk about the US, and still we don't have any robust education about that body in medical school. It's
absolutely.
mind-boggling.
Absolutely.
And menopause is still maybe a 40-minute seminar, maybe.
Yes, it is. There is a dearth of good information about what happens during the transitions.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lack of good educational material available in medical schools. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, that that unfortunately impacts the patient relationship. And then let's be honest, our physicians are super busy. Nurse
Yeah.
practitioners ditto. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
So if you only have 15 minutes to have that conversation, it's unlikely that you're going to get into the kind of detail that is necessary. So this is yet another initiative
Yeah.
that we need to promulgate in our
Yes.
medical schools and even in what we will call middle school, high school, and
Uh-huh.
beyond.
Yeah.
So it really is an opportunity to do a better job of educating and then increasing that level of education as one progresses through one's career. But it's also our job,
Yeah.
entrepreneurs in the space,
Yeah.
to do our best to provide that kind of information. And we can potentially fill those gaps. And speaking of the gaps, we know that there are so many gaps in terms of what is available in menopause. It's starting to change, but let's talk about the gaps. And then let's also talk about the racial disparities,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's a huge issue.
Yes. So the gaps in education or the gaps in care?
So I think we talked about the gaps in education, and I think this is really in the gaps in care, because let's face it, we do focus a lot on certain types of concerns of women.
Yeah.
There are many issues. I think we talk about brain fog, you talk about anxiety and stress. So some of those gaps and how they are being filled today.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge is that there's what, 25,000 OBGYNs in the US. And of those 25,000, 25% of them have any knowledge around menopause and can actually help care for you. So most women are going to at least initially see their general practitioner. And general practitioners, back to what you mentioned earlier about time, really, if they haven't already studied menopause, which they haven't, they really have no information. So a lot of women show up to general practitioners who honestly can't help them, who either tell them, you're too young, and you could be 59 and they'll say you're too young, or they'll give you maybe some paper, for you to go read on your own, or they immediately prescribe a low dose estrogen and have not done any hormone tests on you or anything like that. That's typically what happens to a woman when she shows up to her general practitioner and potentially to her OBGYN as well. So we need a massive push for all of us who can push to the medical community to step up. Physicians have to step up and take some medical education, take a couple of CMEs in menopause. They have to step up. We talked earlier about academia. Most academia departments or directors are men. We need to poke them about improving upon the curriculum that they've put in place as they cover women's health, specifically menopausal transition. So I think we've got these pokings in a couple of areas where these gaps really just lie in general care, because we're not going to be able to address all these different symptoms right? They've identified 34 symptoms, but there's really about 61 symptoms of
Yes.
menopause. And yes, that's very hard for a doctor. So if I showed up at my doctor and I go, doc, my heart is racing, I'm sweating at night, and my breasts are tender, that doctor has 12 to 15 minutes to figure out, what am I going to give Denise? Okay, the heart thing, I can probably work with that. Let me think that's cardiovascular. Let's do an EKG. Let's maybe refer to a specialist, blah, blah. They're going to go down the path of cardiovascular because it's very easy. And being a person of color, they're going to think, well, more Black women tend to have higher rates of heart disease or cardiovascular or hypertension issues, right? That's what's going to happen to me. And that's what happens to a lot of women. Or if I show up and I'm having anxiety, I don't know where it's coming from. So the prescriptive is going to give me antidepressants. Well, I don't need antidepressants. Or I take the antidepressants and guess what? They really didn't work, because that's not really what the issue was, right?
It's menopause.
Is menopause. So that's, these are the things, they sort of gaps that show up when women show up at the doctor, just so many different things. That's why at WisePause, I want to say that the age group of the women that were there, I know, and I threw WisePause in, we haven't even really talked about that, are between the ages of 48 to 65, which means these women are still suffering through perimenopause, through menopause, and in post, they're still having challenges that have not been treated, managed, solved for them, right? So
Yes.
we are not even crossing the barrier, which this should all kind of be somewhat stabilized.
And unfortunately, a lot of this is individualized. So it really requires more than
Yes.
just a 15-minute conversation. So you mentioned Black women. There's a difference in Asian women. There's a difference in Caucasian and Hispanic women. You look at things like, for example, the number of Black women who may have uterine fibroids for whom menopause may have started 8 years earlier, and their doctors are not providing them with sufficient information. And again, this is not to be hypercritical of the healthcare practitioner. They didn't have that sort of training. So there's a gap of knowledge, there's a gap of information that flows to the woman. And this is where we can play a part. I believe that we're seeing more companies entering the space, companies like Tea Botanicals and like Pharma Consumer Healthcare with the product offering that we have in Menowell, to name just a few. Really, all of us have banded together to bring this information, to elucidate this transition in life and to offer solutions. Some of them are overlapping solutions, but that's okay. You may prefer to do a tea rather than a pill or a hormone replacement therapy. It's all good. You need to try different things and see what works for you.
Exactly.
In the case of, how has the investment community caught up in terms of their appetite? Because this is a massive, massive market. More women, I think we have by 2025, it'll be 1 billion women worldwide who are in menopause. And we look at these women have young women. In 1980, there was this massive cohort of women that turned 40 years old, and they are in our sweet spot, right?
They're
the worried well.
And
your mother's menopause.
No, they are, that group is what they're the oldest millennials. So when we think of millennials, we think young. Well, guess what? I mean, millennials as a generation were identified over 10 years ago. Well, now the end group of them are all in their early 40s, right? That end group, they're between 40 and 43 right now, right? So they're entering into the perimenopause stage, and they're going to be like, what the heck? There's not a solve for this? You got to be kidding. So I think we'll find more solutions, and millennials definitely talk about stuff. They're not trying to suffer through it the way the older generations, right, have suffered through. And I think one of the things you said was that we all get together, all of us who are in this space as entrepreneurs, we see this as a sisterhood. No one sees each other as competitions, even when we are competing, because we know this has been so squished down that it's going to take the power of all of us to raise it to a level where we actually can thrive as businesses. So you asked about the investment community. So the investment community, so there's sort of like, I guess, like three aspects of investment for menopause, right? So there's the sort of CPG supplement, over-the-counter type of thing. There's the digital folks who are either having apps or they've got telemedicine aspects. And then there's folks who have devices for like fibroids and things of that nature, right? So that's where how the investment community is looking at what solutions coming into market. The other thing that they're thinking is no one has been a unicorn, right? We don't ask this of other things, but
Right.
there's been no unicorn. So is this really a market, right? I think we are still trying to get out of this as niched. I don't know how you think something that happens to every single woman in the world, menopause, is a niched market, right? With something that has 61 symptoms associated with it, that you think this is niche. But we still have high percentages of investment decision makers who are men. So what you're finding coming into supporting these organizations, these startups, are women. Women who are banding together and investing into different businesses. The challenge is that the amount of investment needed is really large, but the amount given is very small. So if I'm a CPG company, to go into a Walmart or a Walgreens or a CVS, I am going to need minimum $3.5 million. But what will get offered to me is $500,000, right? And I've got to perform a trick, a miracle. I've got to juggle this and juggle that and do it all on a toe, right? And that is how we're held to, how women businesses and women in this space is held to on a different level than a guy who writes some tech thing on a piece of paper and can go and get instantly $10 million for that. So we're not valuing this woman in a way in which the investment dollars can come into it. I mean, I've had investment men say, well, my wife she doesn't have menopause. She doesn't. And I'm like, how old is your wife? 51? Yeah, she's gone through it. Maybe she's on hormone replacement therapy. Maybe you've never listened to her talk about her symptoms. So their barometer is whoever is that woman in their immediate space, right? Because they definitely don't know about the women outside their space. They're definitely not paying attention. They will pay attention to their wife.
Yes.
So if their wife isn't having that experience, to them, they don't think this is mass.
So when I talk about menopause and menopausal transition, I describe it as you start in perimenopause and until death, you have these types of chronic, persistent symptoms for the most part. And when you talk about things like hot flashes, yes, they may subside to a certain degree, but you have them some women have them for 8 to 10 years or longer.
Yes.
Talk about vaginal and vulvar symptoms. It's chronic and persistent. If you stop using product to treat that condition, it will not go away. It will get worse. So I have this conversation with prospective male investors because most of the investment community, no secret to anybody watching or listening to this, we need more women to go into private equity and make the decisions. So when I speak to young women, I say, if you want to go into finance, go into private equity and become a partner or a managing partner, learn how to raise a lot of money.
Yeah.
Then please deploy it into women and women's healthcare.
Yeah.
there's a massive, massive market out here. And when you talk to men today, what I always bring it back to is, are you having sex with your wife? You don't need to answer me. Are you having sex? Because here's what they're not telling you. What they're not telling you is they're probably not having sex because their wives are in menopause, and it is painful, and they don't want to admit that. If they're using an ED drug, their wife is probably falling asleep because she's really tired, so she probably doesn't want to have sex.
Right.
And then her mood is bad, right? So she's looking over at him and she says, I want to put the pillow over your head because you're snoring and I'm not sleeping. So there's the sleep. So shall we go through the 60 plus symptoms? The one you know about is the sex, the one you know about. And this is what I say to guys. Then they're like, oh, yeah, maybe my wife can use your product. Yes, sirree.
That's right.
Yes, sirree. By the way, when she's changing the sheets in the bed every night, not because you're having sex, it's because she's sweating through the sheets.
Right.
Get off the covers. We know what's going on, right? You're telling me you freeze.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the thermostat down to 66 degrees.
Right.
And you're all bundled up. You're telling me your wife's not in menopause? I'm telling you, you're lying.
You're lying. Yeah.
Coincidentally, those are the ones that walk away and go, yep.
Yeah.
Sense to me. It makes sense. We need more of that kind of conversation. And yes, it is. And you can entertain. We talk about the cocktail parties all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right.
And they'll talk about it.
I agree. So in terms of that conversation, that totally radiates for the older male investor, but there's, I would probably say at least, more than a third are really young.
Yes.
Are not quite, they're not having that conversation with their mom, so they don't know, that sexual part of it. They may see their mom sweating, but they're just, honestly, they're frankly disconnected from that. So it is still hard to penetrate even, that group, that guy who, his wife is probably suffering, that conversation really works. So it's, it's definitely, we definitely have a challenge. We have to get men to talk more about this. One of the things that I do is, like, in my gym, all the guys know I'm the menopause one. And they will come over and say, Denise, can I ask you a question? And I'm like, yeah, right. And so they now feel comfortable. They are actually proud. They were like, oh yeah, Denise, a friend of mine, she was having hot flashes, and I talked to her about, oh yeah, I know about hot flashes and night sweats, and there's things you can do about that. And their friend, they were saying, oh my God, the woman couldn't believe that they knew.
Right.
So men who love women want to be helpful.
Exactly.
They really, really want to be helpful. And we have to figure out how to engage them, how to help them have conversations with the people in their lives, and how to, help them to be advocates in this space for us. We're not going to charge through this without engaging them. It's still going to be this thing that we're still struggling to get investment dollars, still struggling to get it as part of curriculum in med schools. In lots of areas where men lead research dollars, men make a lot of the decisions about research dollars. I don't even think the NIH has yet to get a menopause code so that you can actually get research dollars specifically for menopause.
And that is a huge issue. If you just completed the census survey that, as we did, some of the questions there talk about, were you getting research grants to do some of the work that you're doing? And it is innovative work.
Yeah.
But look for the look for the request for proposal. Request for proposal specifically in menopause. That's a very good point. And you're right, enlarging the conversation to enlighten men, younger men, we joke about the older guys who, if they have a female partner, they may, recognize a symptom or two, but they don't recognize all of the symptoms. So it's part of the educational process to engage the younger men.
Yeah.
Who care about a number of things. They may care about the women in their life. They all have a mom, right? They may not always have a female partner, but they all have moms. Perhaps they have a sister. And they want to look at the numbers. And the numbers, if you're looking at a market that has enormous value, where you can make significant contributions, financial contributions, this is your market. Menopause is your market where there is a significant return, and we can show that very easily.
Yeah.
And if you want to scale, look at 4 or 5 or 6 companies that are working in the space that, if they were consolidated, would really be a powerhouse for women in the menopause space.
Yes.
So they haven't caught up yet.
No.
I will say they haven't caught up yet, but we're going to get there.
We're going to get there.
Now, Denise, how do you define success? You've been doing so many wonderful things. You've, been in doing documentaries. You've been in entertainment. You have led a medical school as its chairperson. How do you define success? You've had so much.
I define it really by me using my talents. Like when I feel like I'm using my talents all the way to the max, I feel like now that's success, that I'm using everything I have to do whatever I channel it into, right? I listened to a podcast of a speaker who wanted to speak at our event. And so I was like, oh, what did he really talk about, right? And so I listened to this podcast that was called All In. It was about 9 minutes. And it basically was a story about her son. And that when her son was 13 or 14 years old, he knew what college he wanted to go to. And he was a fencer. So he was all in on everything about what was required to get into this college. He even went to the college's tournaments for fencing. So the coach knew him, the players knew him. He did academically everything he was supposed to do to get into this college. He applies and he doesn't get in. He doesn't get in. And so he goes, okay, I'm going to tell him why I think I'm a great candidate for this school. I'm going to handwrite a note. What kid handwrites a note? I'm going to handwrite a note to the head of admissions. He handwrites 3 notes. He sends it 3 separate times. Crickets, no response. He finally then has to go to a college. He goes to a college and he goes, I'm going to apply as a transfer student. Looks at what is all the things I have to do, how many X amount of classes I have to take in order to be qualified to transfer to this school I want to go to. He does all the paperwork, he gets in. But this kid was all in every part of what it was going to take to get into that college. He went all in. And it made me say to myself, what have I done recently where I'm all in like that, right? And so I'm going to pick something when I come back from vacation and say, I'm going to go all in, meaning I'm going to use every resource, every person I know, and I'm going to go all in on this.
I kind of have a feeling you're all in on pretty much everything you do.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm pretty much all in. Yeah.
That individual who is resilient and tenacious. So what advice would you give to as a mentor and potential role model? Because I'm sure that women listening in would look at you as someone who could be, probably is, a mentor and role model. So what advice do you give to your mentees?
To take the word can't out of your vocabulary, take precedent out of your thinking, and to, now would be all in on whatever that is that you really want to do. To really, if you're going to get seek advice, really listen to it. A lot of young people have their way, they want to do something, but we've been around the block. I mean, you and I, we've been 21, we've been 30, right? We've been 40. We have a history. We've been in the place that you are eventually going to get to. And there are ways that things work that don't really change no matter what generation that we're in. So really listening to the guidance that is being provided, and also not to waste your mentor's time. Always tell people who want to meet with me is go and answer whatever put your questions together and then go find that on Google or some other research. And ask me the questions when you get my time, because you might not get my time again. Ask me the questions you absolutely could not find, right? Because those are the questions that are not going to be found.
Yes,
right?
You have a limited amount of time and you have wisdom that you can share. And it's a particular type of wisdom, right? Given your track record, your history, your personality, why waste your time? Why waste your time, the person that's inquiring, and why waste the time of the person that's giving advice? I think that's something that I am going to remember when I talk to my mentees, for sure.
Yeah.
Do homework before we have our conversation. And if you don't think I'm valuable, then you should probably find another mentor, because you can learn a lot about me by Googling me. It may be I may be the wrong mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
And then lastly, you're going to take some time off. We talk about stress, and all of us who are in menopause have, and particularly those of us that are entrepreneurs and running businesses, as you and I are. What do you do to keep the stress under control and at bay?
So I do a couple things. I mean, I start my day a particular way. So I start my day with reading with spiritual readings, right? I read in two different kinds of books, and then I sit with those thoughts, and then I say, how is this reading going to show up in my life today? And to be open to that, right? To be open to something that isn't on my to-do list, right? Because the universe is talking to me, and to see if I can respond and accept what is going to come inside this day, right? And then I go and I work out. So I run. So I go and run. I do have a trainer I work with. And so I'll do that, either go run or go to the gym. And then I'll come back and I'll sit at my desk and go, okay, what is the plan for the day? Like, what do I have on my schedule? And then I kind of let that day, really flow in. And then I love to read. So I love reading magazines to books. And so I started a few years ago, just reading, nonfiction, because before I would read everything about how to be better, how to do self-development, business books, things like that. And one day I was just like, I'm just going to read something like so brainless, and found I really enjoyed it. Like I really got into the story and I read it really, really fast. So I try to find, a book that I can read over like 2 months. And then I try to prioritize my family and my friends on Saturday. So I'm either going to hang out with my friends on Saturday or hang out with my family on Saturday. And so that's kind of how I do it. And then Sunday, I kind of like winding down in the evening. So sometimes I'll go to, like, I live in California. So there are, in Southern California in particular. So there's tons of sound baths, and I love sound baths. So I try to do one once every 6 weeks. And then I do massages twice a month.
Well, that's quite a repertoire. I love that. So what I'm hearing is that you have a lot of balance in your life, and that's so important. So the elixir is your physical fitness, because we know that those brain chemicals, would just start flowing, and they give us joy, and they help us to focus and get in the zone. Spending time with other folks, people that you love. I love the spirituality. Great advice. It's great advice, because for anybody that's listening in to this podcast, find some things that bring you joy, that distract you from, sort of the mundane, and sometimes even entrepreneurship gets to be mundane, right? So you
Yes.
need to take that mental holiday, and I know you're going to be taking one very soon, and I wish you a restful and restorative holiday away from technology.
Yes, tech is tech free. I
Good.
haven't done tech free in years.
Well, I envy you. I'm going to try to do that myself.
Okay.
And I know that my partner husband is looking forward to that day because it's been a while. So I'm going to take your advice, Denise.
Okay. Yes.
Denise Pines, it was wonderful to have you on the Love Mia Vita podcast. I hope that our listeners and viewers enjoyed this as much as I did, because I always enjoy our conversations, Denise. And
Me
it
too.
won't be the last time.
No.
I hope and pray that you and I will have more conversations about all things menopause.
Yes.
And remember to love Mia Vita, love my life. This is Jerry DiPiano with Ms. Denise Hines, and we are signing off.
Thank you.
Be well.